There you go. Brilliant. Hi, can you all hear me at the back? Yep, all good. Super. Okay, so first of all, as the man said, my name's Sam Grogan. I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Student Experience at the University of Salford, and it's a delight to be here. Thank you very much for the invite to speak to the organisers. Thank you very much. What I'm going to talk about briefly, just to put you in the frame for the next half an hour or so. First of all, I'm going to talk just 30 seconds about my remit, so you understand the frame from which I'm talking. And then I'm going to briefly touch on the external environment. I say only briefly because that external environment has probably been gone over a million times over, and it's a familiar tale of rhetoric, and also probably by the time I'm finished speaking it will have changed anyway. So I'm not going to spend too much on that, just to pick out a couple of things really. And then I'm going to think, well, if that's the external environment, what do our students need in order to be able to meet that environment effectively, in order to be able to meet that environment successfully after they graduate and they go out into the big bad world? And after we've talked about that a minute, I'm then going to say, well, so what are we doing at the University of Salford to help prepare students for that environment? And at that point I'll go into a bit of detail. And really just to share the story of what we're doing. I say what we're doing, we haven't done it, it isn't finished, it's a work in progress, as is many things, and it's a long work in progress, and we're making mistakes, and we're getting it right, and we're getting it wrong, but it's a work in progress, and just to share that story really. When I talk about that, although I'll talk about a couple of examples of what we've done, actually I'm going to focus a little bit more on how we've done what we've done, and a couple of key things there, because actually, thinking about it, universities are broadly the same. They do a couple of big things: teaching and learning and research and enterprise. That's the hearts and lungs, pretty much with a bit of variance and a bit of a difference in emphasis between different institutions and their mission group or their kind of personal kind of emphases, but broadly that's it. And actually Salford is a very distinctive place, and it's becoming more so. And so I'm going to talk really about how we're becoming more and more distinctive, because what we're doing at the moment, it's a very exciting time, is fundamentally changing the way we operate. And perhaps that's, again, a well-worn phrase, but I really do mean it. It's fundamentally challenging every single structure we've got in the university, and how we interact and how we work with all our partners, with our students, with our internal stakeholders. And it is very bold, very distinctive, and will set us aside, or continues to set us aside, from what is an increasingly competitive marketplace. And so it's also terrifying, I can say, as a member of senior staff, but it's great fun as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up with questions. So to begin with then, briefly about my role. As Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Student Experience, I've probably got three big pots. First of all is maintenance and assurance of academic quality and standards. That pretty much goes with the territory of all our portfolio. Then I also, hi, come on in. Then I also look after the teaching and learning endeavour, and the particular characteristic of the teaching and learning endeavour, and the particular philosophy behind how our students learn and how we teach, as well as directing the portfolio, so that kind of has an intersection with that. And finally, the wider student experience. Because actually, what our students are increasingly telling us is that the co- and extracurricular activity, the wider wraparound of pastoral services, and the underpinning infrastructure, which will be of interest to a lot of people here, is actually a key part of what they come to university for. And importantly, that what's the added value? Where are they getting the value added? Because our students don't have time to mess around. Our demographic of students has a lot of commuter students. They come in, they want to get value, and then they leave to their part-time jobs, to their families, to 3 part-time jobs sometimes, to single-parent families. We have a hugely diverse cohort, and we need to serve those needs and do it quickly. And they want to know, front and centre, what's the value added? If I do that club or that society, or I engage in that service, what is it giving me? Really clearly. And I'll come on to that a bit more. But to begin with then, a little bit about the external environment. And to begin with, I think let's look at some predictions. But let's look at not predictions now. Let's look at predictions back from 1999. It's always good to start a little bit of a conference with some David Bowie. This is a video of David Bowie talking to Paxman about the internet in 1999, pretty much 2 decades ago. Indulge me, it's a minute and a half or so, and I apologise for the sound quality. But I'll explain why I'm going to ask you to have a look at that just after the video. But have a look at this. I hope. Maybe. Oh, I've gone too far. Okay, that'll play, hopefully. No? Okay, thank you very much. I'll step aside. Just while we're waiting to get it up, the purpose of this really is, and I'll talk a bit while we're waiting to get it up, the purpose is how Bowie is speaking about the internet in 1999 and how Paxman sees the internet in 1999. What I want to look at then is just really the parallel in that thinking between where we were then, where we're going, and where we are now, and actually the direction forward, because there's a number of key parallels in terms of a paradigm jump that I want to talk about just briefly after the video. I hope. No, it's fine. You're good. Nope. Cheers. Shall I try from here? Okay. Shall I try from... okay. We'll just move on. We'll bounce on. If I can bring it back later, then we'll have a look at it at the end. So what I was going to say is what Bowie and Paxman were talking about is Paxman was basically saying that the internet is just a different delivery system, isn't it? It's just a different way of giving information. And Bowie was very insistent, and actually, no, it's not a different way of information. It will fundamentally change the relationship between information and consumer, or art and consumer. And actually, there's not one truth, there's a multiplicity of truths. And actually, what we get is a symbiotic relationship between user, producer, consumer, user, producer, consumer. And what actually then happens is the user becomes, in Bowie's terms, in simpatico with content. And so the blurring, in Bowie's world, the blurring between the artist and the art form, or the artist and the audience, is very blurred. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because I think where we are now in relationship to the way our students are and the way our campuses are, is what we see now on the horizon is a huge technological disruption, bigger than the Industrial Revolution, and it's coming, and in about the next 10 years I see us jumping again. And again, this is probably a well-worn story, but the Internet of Things, augmented reality and embedded technologies, you know, Fitbits are the thin end of the wedge. But then underpinning all of that, big data. Any one of those things on their own would significantly move things on. But actually a collision of them creates a hugely different landscape. And we have to prepare our students for that landscape, because they're actually creating that landscape as we speak. Now, that's just the technological disruption. And this is probably, again, a very familiar graph. But add to that technological disruption, the geopolitical disruption in the world, the environmental disruption, the ecological disruption, the political disruption. Trump and Farage today, you know, that's kicking off. It's disrupting models. If we think about the business models of Uber or the kind of the hotel B&B, I can't remember what it's called. Airbnb, thank you. If you think about all of those fundamental models, fundamental ways of doing that actually have stood quite a long test of time are being disrupted all the time. And the disruption is being disrupted. So what I want to paint really is a world where actually there are no constants. It is continual change, and it's going to be continual change for quite some time. But I see it particularly with the evolution of technology in the worlds external to universities. Actually, that's what we're being benchmarked against. And I say benchmarked against because our students, when they come to us, the majority of them are coming to the university and they have little or no experience beyond an open day of other universities. So they don't benchmark against other universities. Who really uses KISS data? Really. So my point being is that they don't benchmark against each other. They might have a brief look at it. But the fundamental impression that they get of us when they've come on open days or when they engage in the courses is benchmarked not against other universities, but their experience of this. This is what they benchmark against. Or they benchmark against, I don't know, the experience of an airline, Virgin, or they benchmark against the experience of their local theatre, whatever it might be. So the user experience, that's the world they're benchmarking against. And this disruption is what that world is at the moment. So that's a phenomenal thing for us to answer in order to provide an excellent student experience. Because actually what we need to provide, given that level of disruption, is a student experience that, as I said from my opening slide, prepares them for life. And as a PVC student experience, whilst I come from an academic background, don't tell anyone, whilst I come from an academic background, what I'm really interested in is a preparation of the student as global citizen, which goes beyond an academic excellence and actually develops a skill set that they might use. And I don't mean a kind of a tangible skill set. I mean an interpersonal, very soft skill set. And I don't mean that in any negative way either. And that's our job as a university, to prepare them for that. How are we going to do that? Because actually the skill set for success now is disrupted entirely from the old silo-based models, where actually the knowledge that I hold, the knowledge of my subject or my discipline, actually now doesn't become the thing to aim for. It becomes the conduit, the vessel, the cipher through which a wider, softer skill set is understood. So what happens, I mean, I'm going to take myself as an example, and I was going to do this in the introduction. I started as a dancer. And then I know, exactly. How, what? And then I started training actors and dancers after about 10 years performing and doing lots of touring. And then I started managing trainers, people who train actors and dancers. And then I started teaching and learning, and now I'm... So my point is that the discipline is no longer the end point, the discipline-specific knowledge. Of course there will always be disciplines. Of course there will. We need disciplines in order to be interdisciplinary. That's the nature of it. But the world is not discipline silos. The world is real problems that require the cooperation between what have previously been quite distinct knowledge bases. So what that means is the skill set for success from automation, from globalization through networking knowledges, and the rising productivity of the highly skilled few fundamentally change the emphasis from knowledge-driven to a softer skill set. Because in the real world, the value, and you'll all be very aware of this, the value created by a firm's culture and networked worth is not knowledge-based, it's social. So what we actually should be creating in order to answer that very disruptive, very fluid world is polymaths. We need to be creating individuals with a varied set of skills and interests. Using their cross-disciplinary backgrounds, such individuals are then better qualified to find novel solutions to stubborn problems. They're a cheaper and better value-added hire for the business. If we're on about employability, and Salford very, very heavily is about employability in its widest sense, what we're after is that the industries to which we face are after graduates that require far less training and that can be applied to a variety of business needs. And those graduates, therefore, are more resilient because they're able to adapt to swings in the labour market, and the variety of skills can be applied in a number of fields and industries. So, in all the ways that matter in the future, with that hugely disruptive landscape, hugely changing landscape, the future belongs to the super professionals, the cross-disciplinary, digitally fluent breed of worker that then has a variety of skills and can adapt and identify to new possibilities and do it quickly. Fail Fail fast and get up again, quickly. So that's the job. That's what we should be focusing on. And certainly that's very close to the mission of Salford. So if that's the job, how are we going to do that? How on earth are we going to prepare students for that world? Because I absolutely morally and ethically see that if they come to us, they should be leaving with a greater sense of their place in the world and their understanding of their own ability to meet the challenges of the world than when they arrived. That should fundamentally be our job. I'm going to talk about Salford now. Over the last 18 months, this is how we're going to meet that challenge. Over the last 18 months, we've worked a huge amount of consultation, huge amounts of conversations, been very messy at times, in order to re-look at our vision and our strategy. And I've been at Salford for about 2.5 years now, and I don't recognise the place. It's changing so fast. But this is our new, well, not new now, but this is our vision. And again, it speaks fundamentally to partnership with the world. It's about exceptional industry partnerships, in order that we can lead the way in real-world experiences. Salford is not a house on the hill, and I recognise that that's absolutely appropriate that some universities are that and do have that mission, and that's absolutely fine. Salford's about integrating with the real world in order that we can prepare students for life. Not academic excellence, that will be a strand of it, but about life and where they go from here, in order that they can holistically succeed. So that's what we're about. In terms of how we're going to do that then, that's a wonderfully easy strapline, but how? I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of things here. First of all, the top. This is our strategy in one couple of boxes. First of all, the top line is what you've just heard, and I want to bring your attention to these two here. First of all, this is what I talked about a fundamental reshaping of the world. I'm going to talk about industry collaborative zones in a minute, and I'll go into some detail. But essentially, they are the front door by which the world will understand the University of Salford. So if someone has a problem or an issue or an idea or something they want to solve, whatever it might be, rather than going to this department and then realising, oh, I've got to interface with that department, and then I've got to go over there, and actually I need to get those three together. And it's problem-centric. So rather than our departments and our schools and our faculties, it reorientates the university to speak to the big issues of the world: transport and energy and infrastructure and health and well-being. And we've got 4 very large front doors, essentially, underpinned by a 5th in business: sport, health and well-being, engineering and environments, and digital and creative. And imagine really, and I'll give you an example later on where this is mirrored inside the university, but imagine them as essentially a digital and a literal front door. It's not new buildings, but it's clustering our schools and our programs around those big problems, so that when someone does come to us, we can then answer the problem rather than have them worry about which department to go to. Because that's not their problem. They're the customer. They're the stakeholder. In order for us to do that, first of all, the old silos, you can feel them actually, that really challenging old silos of schools. But we've also recognised that there's 3 very big enablers that we're going to need to work on in and of themselves in order to change that culture of behaviour. Equipping staff for co-creation, and students, I would say, and external stakeholders. I'll come on to that in a minute, because that's a particular aspect of the how that I want to pull out. 21st century standard infrastructure. You will all be very interested in that, and I'll pull a little bit out of that later when I talk about our campus framework or our campus master plan. And a network of exceptional industry partners. We're not interested in working with every man and his dog. What we're interested in is working with the big partners that will add value, and we can actually almost treat them as umbrellas and get so much from them for our students. So a bit more about then industrial collaborative zones. Essentially they are, as I've said, gateways, a physical and initial virtual focus for collaboration within the university and with partners in particular sectors, in order that we can create, learn and apply knowledge to drive a modern, knowledge-driven economy. You can feel it speaking to what was the BIZ agenda. Now I'm not sure where it sits, Ofsted or UCRI, never mind. So for students, they get to access industry. So front and centre, every student will have a placement, everyone. Front and centre, every student will engage with industry. When I say placement, I'm being fairly broad there. And our industry partners will get stuff that they could not get. So there has to be a what's in it for me, and we've thought very hard about what's in it for me. And essentially what the industry zones begin to represent is, if you imagine a Venn diagram for a moment, between teaching and learning, research and enterprise, and industry engagement, that bit there. That's an industry collaboration zone, where teaching becomes research, becomes enterprise, becomes industry engagement. Same thing. Now that's a huge challenge to what are traditional curricula, traditional siloed working in schools, traditional programs, but we are moving, and it's on my task, we're moving a whole of our programs, all 280 of them, through a process of development in order that they can become ICZ ready. And we've defined principles of curriculum, and we're moving on like that. A bit more about the industry collaboration zones, and what this diagram really shows is that we've got the big front doors. Underneath, that's underpinned by a partnership and relationship management layer, which then leads to the student experience actually moving from a relatively safe learning experience, where they might have interaction with industry, or industry might come into the classroom, through the years into increased flipped learning, work-based learning, and all the way through into live briefs. But actually live briefs are coming increasingly down into that area now. The purpose of that is to get them to risk. It's a real problem, and just to share a problem that we're having at the moment. The compulsory curriculum, I think, with the delight of Gove having had his hands on it for a while, has knocked every element of risk, play, discovery, adventure, exploration out of the capacity. Learn to pass, not learn to learn. Learn to do, learn to risk. Everything that our industry partners are saying is, we want riskers, we want innovators, we want people who are going to push the boat without knocking it over. The fundamental difficulty we're having, and we will continue to have, is how do we prepare our students prior to arrival in order to engage in a risky, explorational, play-based learning journey. But we're on that journey, and it's happening. And the transformation of curriculum and a huge amount of work before they arrive in order to acclimatise them is part of that work. But underneath that, you can see the old schools. These are acronyms for the schools. Nursing, midwifery, social work and social science, natty title. Computing science and engineering, School of Business, Health Sciences, School of Built Environment, School of Arts and Media and School of Environmental Life Sciences. So now these become the back door. These don't become anything to do with the front door. Of course there are bureaucratic structures, but who, in the industry world, who cares about a school? No one. What they care about is their problem. And that's the thing that drives the conversation. So that's a little bit about industry collaboration zones. That's a very different how to a normal what of teaching, research, enterprise. What we've recognised is a key enabler. I'll talk about a little bit about co-creation now. Co-creation or co-production really recognises a number of stakeholders as having an equal but distinct say in the process. So I emphatically don't mean consultation. Consultation is us building it and giving them after the fact. That's not true engagement, really. And if you think about the evolution of student engagement, a little while ago it was students at the heart of the system in the white paper a little while back, and then the university's responses was to put students on every committee, and then they fell asleep, and then it was a bit boring, and then it became students as partners, kind of, and actually, but there's a small partner there and a big partner with the university, not really partners, not really. And now we're moving beyond that towards students as co-creators. And the analogy I would use, and again, this is very difficult to get into students' heads, but again, there's a piece of work around that I'm happy to talk about at length outside the room, because actually they position themselves as consumers. But the popular notion of consumer is a transactional model, a Sainsbury's model. I go in, I buy my rice, I leave, that's it. Student as consumer. Actually, they're not consumers. The analogy we're using is actually a consumer as in a gym membership. And actually, apart from light and heat, you don't really consume anything at a gym. What you do produce, you're a producer, and you produce your future self. You produce a fitter, leaner, meaner, quicker you. So what the student is actually a gym member. Because actually, they have to take responsibility for their part in the journey. We will provide the best gym equipment, the best learning equipment, the best facilities, the best infrastructure, the best learning. It's not our job to get on the treadmill and start running for them. And if they don't go to the gym and then they rock up in 6 months complaining they're not thin and fit, it's not my fault, it's their fault, because I provided the treadmill. So it's very much about co-creation with the students, recognizing them as an equal partner, but also ITSU. There's 4 partners there: industry, tutors, students and users. So users of an eventual industry, and I would give an example of healthcare, where actually the recipients of the healthcare provision, which our students are engaged in training for, will be in the room working as part of their assessment, and will give them very brutal feedback, and they learn so quickly. When a patient says, I didn't like what you did, and this is why, it stings, but they don't do it twice. It's great. So what we're after there is industry tutors, students as users being co-creative partners, co-producing. And so co-creation signals a mode of doing for the university in which the problem or issue or desired working is co-defined by all stakeholders at the outset. We're not saying we know what the problem is, we probably have the solution, but we'll consult with you. We're saying we don't know what the problem is. Actually, we need you to co-define it, and then we'll all build it together. What this means is then cooperation and collaboration across departments, across stakeholders. Self-managing units of action, that's a direct challenge to a hierarchical line management. Salford is emphatically non-hierarchical. It's and we're working a lot to keep that going, so that the kind of relationship between the Vice-Chancellor's group that I sit on and the University Management group, but then also wider down into the university, and I've even used the word down there, which probably is a contradiction in terms, but across the university, it's actually about collaboration. It doesn't matter who has the idea. What matters is that the idea works. So I don't care where it comes from. And that's an important thing. The Vice-Chancellor's group, I can say as a member of the Vice-Chancellor's group, we emphatically don't have the ideas. It's the best ideas, the people across the university and our partners. So participants bring themselves, not just their role. It's not, your participation is not defined by your role. This is a direct challenge. You can feel a real push to traditional working structures. This is the kind of picture that I'm painting. And this is a 10-year journey for us that we've started a couple of years ago, and is a long way to go. So I'm not suggesting that this is done in 6 months or by Thursday. Thank you very much. Tick. It's not like that at all. And it's very messy. This is not a risk-free process, but it's lots of fun. So that's co-creation really, and that signals a very different mode of doing for our university. So how are we beginning to put this on the ground? One of the things we've done is develop a campus framework which has very, very broad principles, and we're in the process of now working out which bits come first, and it might be learner analytics, or it might be this, that, and the other. Not to say that's not happening at the moment, but actually drawing it all together into a cohesive framework. We've talked about a campus framework because actually it's not buildings or cliques, and actually our students don't think in those two ways. They hang out on WhatsApp, and that's it. There's no differentiation between the virtual and the physical. So what we want to do is to slowly, and it will be continually evolving, build an intelligent and evolving learning landscape, which begins with the campus framework. And the campus framework has a number of principles across the physical and the digital. We've had to separate them, although there was a real struggle because we didn't want to. But actually, for bureaucratic purposes, we've had to separate them. But it's connected, coherent, enjoyable, creative, and engaging. And those are the broad principles sitting across our campus framework that we will then use as a criteria to apply to this project or that project or whatever it might be. So it's my email. Nice. Never offline. And so what this shows is really, essentially, it's a gold-plated student experience. It really is a different way of working, a fundamental challenge to our systems. And our Vice-Chancellor has been absolutely amazing in saying, very publicly and slightly scarily at times, if it doesn't add value, if the form you're filling in doesn't add value, or there's an easier way to do it, don't fill in the form and see what crashes. And only by crashing sometimes, little crashes, fail fast, fail often, will we actually be able to do it. Otherwise, we'll just continue to feed the machine. And that's no good. It will be disruptive, that's fine, but look at the external world. So it's a step change in the culture, and it will lead to what we're broadly terming a gold-plated student experience. Again, and that's really beginning to come through now. We've made significant gains in the NSS, and we're seeing significant increasing engagement from our student body. But again, as per co-creation, it's more than collaboration, but what it delivers is an intelligent campus. So where we're going through the physical and the digital infrastructure is actually to develop an underpinning infrastructure which will intelligently foster success for the students. So they know through analytics, and I'm not going to go into that, that's an obvious one. But what I'm looking, for instance, in the modular scheme is actually like an Amazon model. You did this module. Other people who did this module also did this. The learning scheme on this module is X, Y, and Z, but actually your profile suggests that you're more suited to ABC. It's that intelligent choice that you're giving the student, at the same time helping them be nudged towards productive behaviours. So there's a lot of work at the moment we're doing around geolocation, so that actually we can nudge people towards productive behaviours, and the campus intelligently steers them towards productive behaviours around a whole range of data points and analysis. And I see that only continuing increasingly in order to help them succeed. So a couple of things very briefly that we've done or we're doing. This is our revisited student voice policy, and this was done a little while ago. Our previous iteration of our students' voice policy was very much along the lines of, you will talk, and we will talk to you, and you will listen, and that's it. What we've done here is created, again, with the students. They built it, really. They had the great ideas around it. With professional services and academic staff, a flexible policy framework that allows us to talk much quicker. It was very interesting. I did a little bit of, I suppose, anecdotal research and around the word immediate. And because one of the problems was that it seemed that problems were being stored up for the NSS, or stored up for committee meetings, or stored up for module evaluation, and then all hell was breaking loose. When actually the students want the answer now. And I did a little bit of work around what immediate means. I asked some academics, what do you mean by immediate in terms of a response? And they said, by the end of the week on email. That's immediate. I asked, lovely. I asked a student what we mean by immediate, and they went, 2 minutes, 3 minutes on Twitter. Institutions move at the pace of committees. Students move at the pace of social media. And they're both called immediate. No wonder there's a disjoint. This allows us to move that communication, and importantly, it joins up communications, engagement and feedback, so the students don't just shout out into the void, but they know that their voice has been heard. So this is a bi-monthly thing, and this is probably the slowest loop. Obviously, on a day-to-day operational basis, it just happens very, very quickly. We go out and we do vox pops, and we do online, and we do in the street surveys around what's bothering you at the moment, what's on your mind at the moment, how are you feeling. All of that data is collected across the various areas of campus and digitally, and it's analysed for the key themes. Then the key themes are collated and reported on. Again, this is within a couple of working days. And then out to the schools for an action-based response to those themes. So a theme might be, actually, we're feeling very lonely. So we then think, well, what are we doing and what could we do to actually answer that question? So actually, the same job of work might be talked about very differently at different stages of the year. For instance, I'm feeling very lonely. We might then push messages about recent improvements to Wi-Fi, because actually you can be contactable anywhere, anytime, it's okay. A little later in the year, it might be, I'm really stressed about exams. Don't worry, because you can study anywhere, anytime, because we have done this and we are doing this. So it allows us to nuance our messages to actually fit the student, the concern cycle, really. What it also allows us to do is learn year on year on year on year. So what we're getting is an increasingly richer source of data that then allows us to know what the student is going to want before they actually want it. And that's where we're going. Again, you'll feel the beginning of analytics here. Ask Us is, something that was very cheap to do, not much money at all. But actually, rather than the student going to this department, that department, and that department, they go to one place and they can ask anything and we'll get it sorted. The co-location of departments behind there mirrors the ICZs. The students don't care about which department they're speaking to. What they really care about is their problem. And what we're finding is hugely positive feedback. It allows synergies between teams that previously were in different buildings, and it allows, and there's untold benefits there that I don't even know about, but they're working much more smartly. And it allows, again, because every contact is recorded, it allows us to start nuancing resource on a live basis. It's also, again, designed by students. That was a student-based design process that led to that layout, and it allows us to do a one-stop shop. 98% of queries are answered in the first 10 minutes. It's great. Happy students. Again, it's not a revolutionary model, but what's very useful is the data that comes out of it, which is informing that model in an ongoing loop. But that points to the next thing, which is that actually data doesn't do anything at all. Data just sits in a top drawer or on a file. People do things. And actually, if you don't glue the data to people, nothing's going to happen. It just looks very nice and shine in a nice box. Student progression assistants use that data and work alongside student life, academics and students, to bridge and signpost services. So we put one in each school, and they look weekly at weekly attendance data, and then they phone up students saying, are you all right? Have you thought about, is everything okay? So that allows us, again, to plug data into processes, and they've been very useful. They also create data themselves that then feeds back into how we do what we do and makes it more efficient. Lessons we're learning. We've just begun, really. We're just touching the edge here, and I think in the 10 years, again, it's going to be a very different landscape that we sit in, but also that we create. One size does not fit all. We're finding that we're having to nuance on almost a program-by-program basis, which makes it really messy and really problematic. But actually co-creating the solution with those programs and actually really listening to them, what we find is the buy-in as a result of that, because they built it and they own it, it's theirs. And that's fantastic, that's really enjoyable. As I've said, we're moving towards a data-driven and reflexive and nuanced, co-produced, co-created environment which prizes a user-defined excellence. So actually, I have no idea what defines an excellent experience for a student. They will have the best idea because they're the expert learners. I'm not. I did my degree years ago. I have no idea what it means to them, particularly with the demographics. So there's a huge amount of analysis and data sitting under all of this. And as I said, data doesn't do things, people do things. So where we're moving is, in terms of our campus, is a step change. And what that step change essentially is aiming to deliver is a fluid relationship between an intelligent environment, a physical environment, a digital domain which works seamlessly with it because our students don't recognize the difference, and the culture that both enables and creates, and which creates it. Actually then, in David Bower's terms, it becomes in simpatico, it becomes working between them. And it's a fundamental challenge to the notion of a university as a provider, which is then a challenge to the notion of the student as customer. Actually, we're not a provider where knowledge is transacted as a commodity. Actually, what we're moving through the industrial collaborative zones, through our campus framework, is actually Salford as a co-producer of knowledge as a cultural, socially constructed experience, where stakeholders all work together towards a sustained, holistic sense of success. And that's where we're going. I'll stop there, and happy to take questions and comments and criticisms and all the rest of it. Yeah, thank you.
I think we've just got a couple of minutes for questions because we're very close to time there. So if anyone's got a question.
Hi.
Do wait for the mics. Some of us are a bit hard of hearing.
George Ford from the University for the Creative Arts. Thank you very much indeed for your insight. It's been very interesting. Please, could you give us your thoughts on the world in which we live at the moment? Things like identity are sold as commodity. So how would you go about educating the user base, be it student or staff, about security and how you protect your own identity and other digital assets?
It's really difficult, isn't it? And it's a moving feast. I think there are... If I talk firstly about the position of the student as they come to us, and then I'll talk briefly about the learning experience. I think that's and obviously with the unregulated seas of social media, you can't police social media, nor should we try. So first of all, with the student, when they come to us, I think what we could do is help them understand the kind of graduate we're trying to create, which has a number of principles sitting underneath it. One of them, for instance, the principles about the curriculum design that I talked about, is education for ethical purpose in the world. Now, underpinning that is a set of personal principles that we'll ask them to interact with. So I would hope that through engagement in that very clearly structured and defined curriculum which gets them to think about life, they would arrive, or be helped to arrive, at a personal position, because I think it can only be personal. I don't think it should be prescriptive. Linked to that, in terms of, I went to the curriculum first, but linked to that in terms of their entry into us and into the university, I think if a university says, come to us and we will make you like us, we will teach you to be us, I think there is an implicit deficit assumption in that on the part of the student. You haven't quite got what you need, come to us and we'll give you what you need. Transactional again, it's no good. Where we're going is through co-creation, is a recognition of the skill set that they bring, and we will build it together and amplify it so that actually you could know your place in the world. Does that make sense? So, and through that process of self-knowing, one might arrive at a reasoned personal position of principle with respect to what you're talking about. But it's not, I wish there was a magic bullet. There's not. It's a horribly difficult world. With regards to privacy and engagement and privacy, I think course by course and the traditions and the particular culture of the discipline will then help inform what becomes a very private learning space and a space for failure, and sometimes then what becomes public failure. Again, from a performing arts background, first year's training as an actor, you do not perform in public, end of. Now that's my culture. From a musician, it's totally opposite. They come with a band already formed and they're already out there. So I think the culture of the discipline, whatever that might be, informs that notion of privacy and should be encouraged to do so. And our program teams are actively engaging with how do we use and how do we teach our students to use social media. So the nursing programs at Salford have got an amazing Twitter feed which is curated by students, and it wobbled a bit at the start with, and actually then they found their balance and they realised how and what it's for, and in there is a marker. So yeah, I don't know whether that answers the question, but thank you. Okay. Great question.
Very, very quickly, please.
Sorry.
Hi, Greg Plowman from Liverpool here. You talked about Salford working in a non-hierarchical way and being open to ideas from everywhere. I just wonder how that you can make that work practically. How are those ideas fed in, and who sort of measures the cost and the value of the ideas and prioritises them?
So give you one example about how we're doing it. Again, we haven't solved that entirely, and I don't think it will ever be solved. So one thing that we've initiated is the idea of Salford conversations. So both on a one-to-one basis, I sit around campus and don't know what's going to come at me, and people just sit down and have a chat. And likewise, wider conversations that are slightly more structured, to allow these things to bubble up. And we're in the process now of creating a digital, an online funnel for anyone to bring forward. But I think it's multi-channel. It's like the student voice. Actually, it's going to come at us from a number of angles, and all we should do is, rather than create mechanisms and boxes, we should work to create listening, because actually we're going to have to get good at listening from a number of angles. And actually, how we then evaluate those ideas is actually almost critical mass and the business need. We begin to push against the curriculum principles, the campus principles, and begin to test the idea. Where it comes from, it doesn't matter, and against those principles. So we've kicked the tires on those principles quite heavily, and we're happy with those, and so that's how we would measure it. And it's also got KPIs and outcomes and lead indicators, etc., sitting behind that.
Okay. That's what we've got time for, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.